Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to jump right into a really big question today, probably one of the biggest. Who, or maybe what, is that I that you feel is at the very center of your world?
So let's really get into this. I mean, just pause and think about it for a second. You've got that voice in your head, right? That inner narrator that's just always on. It's running this constant commentary on everything you do. It's the part of you that plans and worries and remembers and judges. But what is that voice really? And where in the world does it come from? Well, modern neuroscience actually has a name for the brain circuitry behind all that inner chatter. They call it the default mode network, or DMN for short. And the name is perfect, really. It's the network that's most active by default, when you're not focused on some big task. It's when your mind wanders that this network just lights up and starts weaving together your past, your present, your future, basically creating that continuous story of me.
So here's what we're going to do in this explainer. We're going to tackle this idea of the self from two really different but powerful angles: modern neuroscience and ancient Buddhist texts. We're going to look at the voice inside your head, check out science's model of the self, and then pivot to an ancient view. Then we'll see where those two lenses converge, how we might be able to rewire the brain's self, and finally, what it might even mean to live without such a solid, separate self.
All right, first up, let's put on our science hats. To even begin to understand how our brain pulls off this trick, creating this feeling of a self, we have to look at this really fascinating idea called the attention schema theory. What's so cool about it is that it gives us a way to think about our own awareness, something that feels so mysterious, in a completely mechanistic way.
So what's the core idea here? Well, the theory basically says that your feeling of awareness, that subjective experience, it isn't some kind of magic ghost in the machine. No. It's actually the brain's own internal model of its attention process. The best analogy is probably a computer's user interface. You see simple icons and folders, not the millions of lines of code running underneath. It's a simplified, super useful picture of what's going on. And that's what your sense of self is for your brain.
Okay, so to build this user interface of awareness, the brain needs a few key parts. Let's break it down. First, it's got to have a model of the self. A representation of you, the one who's actually doing the attending. We can just call that S.
Then, second, it obviously needs a model of the thing you're paying attention to. So let's just say you're looking at an apple. Your brain creates an internal representation of that apple, that visual stimulus. We'll call that V.
And here's the final and honestly the most crucial piece of this puzzle. The brain doesn't just model the self and the apple separately. That's not enough. It models the relationship between them, the very act of attention itself, and we'll call that A.
So the whole thing, the crucial point, is that the brain is representing the entire relationship, S plus A plus V. You've got the self attending to a stimulus. But, and here's the real twist, the brain's model of attention, that A, it's just a simplified sketch. It leaves out all the messy biological details, the neurons firing and all that. And because that physical information is missing from the model, the brain basically draws a conclusion. It concludes it has some kind of mysterious, non-physical property, what we call subjective awareness. It feels like you mentally possess the apple, not like you're just running a complex biological process.
Okay, now let's switch gears completely. I want you to travel back with me, way back, like 2,500 years, to the time of the earliest Buddhist texts, the suttas. We're going to see how they wrestled with this exact same question about consciousness and self, long before anyone had ever dreamed of an fMRI scanner. This quote from an ancient text, a sutta, really gets right to the heart of it. What it's suggesting is that consciousness isn't some kind of standalone, independent thing. Instead, it's totally tied to what these texts call name and form. And name and form is basically their term for the whole shebang, all of our mental and physical experiences combined.
So, name and form is everything, your thoughts, your feelings, what you see, what you hear. And the big argument in the suttas is that consciousness simply cannot exist separately from all of that. It's a dependent process. It only pops into existence with an object. Think about it. You are never just conscious in a vacuum. You are always conscious of something.
Okay, so how on earth do these two ideas connect? I mean, a modern brain theory and a 2,500-year-old text. Well, this is where things get really interesting, because this is where our two very different perspectives start to sound, well, remarkably similar. They're both pointing to the exact same idea, that the self is not at all what it appears to be.
Just take a look at this comparison. On one hand,
Neuroscience is telling us the self is a useful, simplified model. It's a representation, not the actual, messy machinery underneath. On the other hand, the early Buddhist texts are saying consciousness is a dependent, conditioned process. It only arises when the conditions are right, and it vanishes when they're gone. You see? Both of them, in their own language, are telling us the exact same thing. That solid, independent self you feel you are, it's a construct.
And this is what brings us to a really key concept, non-duality. At least non-duality as it's understood in these early texts. Now, this isn't some mystical, floaty idea about becoming one with the cosmos. It's actually something much more practical. It's the realization that the subject, the I, and the object, the world, they aren't really separate things. They arise together in one single, interdependent process of knowing. The self isn't some standalone thing looking out at the world. It's co-created, moment by moment, with the very world it perceives. Okay, so if our sense of self is a construct, maybe even just a kind of cognitive habit, that leads to a huge question. Can we change it? Can we change our relationship to it? And what's amazing is that both of these traditions would give a resounding yes. And the main tool they both point to is a kind of mental training.
Things like meditation, what you might call contemplative practice, are basically a way to just step back and watch the machinery of your own mind do its thing. You're training yourself to see that user interface we talked about, that simplified model of you for exactly what it is, just a model. The goal is to stop getting so completely lost inside the story it's constantly telling. And get this kind of training has real, actual, measurable effects on the brain.
Remember that default mode network? The brain's inner narrator? Well, brain scan studies show this again and again. When people are meditating, activity in the DMN drops. And I mean significantly. That endless chatterbox in your head, the one looping through memories, anxieties, and all that self-criticism, it just quiets down. You are literally turning down the volume knob on the story of me. But it's actually more than just getting some peace and quiet in your head. This change in brain activity points to something much deeper. It's a fundamental shift in how we process the world around us. It's like switching from one operating system to another. So most of the time, our brain is running on what you could call active inference. A good way to think about this is like trying to force puzzle pieces to fit a picture you already have in your head. Your brain is trying to make reality conform to its existing stories about me and the world. But meditation can help us shift into perceptual inference. And that's totally different. That's where you look at the puzzle pieces first, and you let the picture emerge from the data. You're updating your internal models to match reality, not forcing reality to match your models. So, where does this all lead? I mean, what's the end game here? Are we supposed to just get rid of the self completely? What would that even be like? To live without this thing that feels like the very center of our lives.
And here's the crucial takeaway. The point is not to destroy or eliminate the self. Not at all. That model, that user interface, it's incredibly useful. We need it to navigate the world. The whole point is just to see it for what it is, a tool, a story, a process, instead of mistaking it for some fixed, solid, separate thing that you are. Because when you realize the story is fluid, that it can change, well, that's where a profound sense of freedom comes from.
And that leaves us with one last, really powerful thought to consider. Seeing the self as a story doesn't make you less. It actually empowers you. It means the narrative isn't set in stone. It means you actually have a say in how the next chapter gets written. So maybe the most important question isn't, who am I? But rather, if the self is a story my brain is telling itself, what story will I choose to live?